Today, South Australia braces for dangerous fire conditions. Residents urged to heed the warnings.
With the types of conditions we see today, fires will be fast moving and potentially put communities and lives at threat.
Also ahead, fake children used to defraud millions of dollars from the federal government. Alleged ringleaders of the criminal syndicate charged. The Iranian government calls the killing of its most senior nuclear scientist an act of state terror. And a dedicated group of owl hunters in Western Australia make an unusual discovery along the Margaret River. Hello, this is ABC News. I'm Miriam Corrowan. Total fire bans are in place for large areas of South Australia today as the state prepares for a scorching hot weekend. Temperatures are predicted to sit in the 40s for more than 20 towns and cities, with a top temperature of 47 expected in central parts of the state. Reporter Natasha Kalios is in Adelaide. Natasha, another extremely hot day today and fire authorities are on standby.
Yeah, good afternoon. That's right. It is a high fire danger day today, so the Country Fire Service has its hands full. And already just having a look, there are a couple of grass fires around the place, including a building fire as well. Nothing major and no emergency alerts as yet, but of course we'll be monitoring those and we'll bring any developments as we get them to you. But that's right, CFS says that today is a high fire danger day. There are total bans right across the state. In Adelaide, it is expected to reach 37 degrees. Right now, it's about 31 degrees. A lot cooler than yesterday, but in some parts of the state, particularly up north, we're about to see temperatures reach 47 degrees. Let's take a listen, though, to what the CFS had to say a little earlier.
We're asking people in all areas of the state today to be prepared, have their bushfire survival plan updated, and today is the day to enact that bushfire survival plan to ensure their family and their friends know what to do well ahead of a fire starting. And then unfortunately, if a fire does start, implement that plan as quickly as possible, because with the types of conditions we see today, fires will be fast moving and potentially put communities and lives at threat.
Challenging day there for firefighters. Natasha, just how are people keeping cool though with COVID restrictions in place?
Yeah, so no doubt hundreds, if not thousands of people will flock to South Australian beaches today. People there are being encouraged to practice social distancing whilst on the beach. And of course, there are major retail sales at the moment across all the suburban shopping centres and the city's mall. So people are being encouraged to grab a mask and wear your mask when you're out shopping. It's not mandatory, but it is being strongly encouraged by health authorities here. So we do have a health press conference coming up around midday. So in terms of cases, we don't know how many new cases there are today of coronavirus, but we will keep you up to date.
OK, we'll check in again. Natasha Kalios there in Adelaide. A couple charged over the death of a toddler who was allegedly left in a hot car in North Queensland has had their case adjourned until next month. Police were called to Townsville University Hospital just before 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, where the girl had been taken by the pair. The 37-year-old mother did not appear in court this morning. Her case has been adjourned to the 14th of December. Her 29-year-old partner appeared at the Townsville Magistrates Court this morning and also had his case adjourned to the 14th of December. They've both been remanded in custody. 2 childcare workers and a woman who owns a large family daycare business are among 5 people charged over an alleged Melbourne-based criminal network. Australian Federal Police are accusing those involved of fraudulently taking millions of dollars in childcare subsidy payments and COVID-19 stimulus payments. 3 women and 2 men aged between 28 and 47 were arrested after 10 properties were raided across 8 suburbs in Victoria and New South Wales last Wednesday. Overseas now, an Iranian nuclear scientist long suspected of masterminding a secret atomic weapons program has been assassinated near Tehran. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh died of injuries in hospital after armed assassins fired on his car, according to Iranian media. Chief Foreign Correspondent Philip Williams has more.
It happened in a town just outside of Tehran, a small town called Absard City. It looks like there was an explosion and small arms fire, which would indicate that there were people probably on the ground. It's obviously a well-planned attack, and the Iranians have no doubt about who was involved here. They pointed the finger very directly at the Israelis. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a few years ago actually named the scientists by name and said, "Remember this name," meaning that there will, the implication being that there may be news at some point attached to him. Well, some years later, there certainly is. And from the Iranian point of view, no doubt who did it, but the Israelis are not saying anything. They're maintaining silence at the moment. So we can only really speculate about who did it and why. But of course, if it was the Israelis that did it, then the implication would be pretty simple, that he was heading the Iranian nuclear effort, and that he had knowledge, he had deep knowledge, and would be the one person that could propel that program from peaceful program to nuclear bomb. And that's what the Israelis have said they will never allow to happen. Well, he was extremely significant, not a household name, of course, but extremely significant. He was well known. He headed that program. He was the leader of the research centre in the elite Revolutionary Guard, and he was a leading member of the Iranian nuclear program. So a very important man, a man with deep scientific knowledge. And I think if it was the Israelis involved in that, or whoever it was no doubt that brought his downfall, because clearly they wanted to eliminate somebody with the depth of that knowledge. There is, of course, other possibilities that other countries or other individuals or groups could have been involved in this. But from the Iranian point of view, all the suspicions point towards Jerusalem. You've got the spectre at the moment, of course, of Joe Biden coming in as the US president, and he has expressed the view that he probably will rejoin in some form or another the nuclear deal that was hammered out between the Americans and the Europeans, ostensibly to stop the spread of a nuclear weapons program in Iran in exchange for lifting of sanctions and various other incentives. That program was abandoned by Donald Trump. But I guess you have to ask the question, particularly as this scientist worked for the Revolutionary Guards, who act pretty independently of government in a sense. They are, in a sense, a law to themselves, as how they will react to doing a deal now with the American new administration. So it may have those sort of implications. It's a bit early to tell if it will. But certainly what it will do is absolutely enrage the Iranian government, who, of course, have had other leaders assassinated in various places around the world. And, if this is an Israeli attack, it will, again, just from the Iranian point of view, underline that their absolute visceral hatred of the Israelis, and of course do nothing in terms of encouraging some sort of rapprochement or deal.
US President Donald Trump is rapidly running out of time and legal options to advance his argument that the election was rigged after suffering another defeat in the courts. Greg Jennett has more from Washington.
Donald Trump can't really take a trick in the courts right now. The dismissal of his claims seem to be coming almost daily, and this latest case was before a federal appeals court, and it summarily dismissed the appeal, which was based on an earlier ruling in a Pennsylvania court that there had been multiple forms of irregularity, particularly in the vote counting processes, and a lot of those claims centred on the access that vote monitors, or what we would call in Australia scrutineers, had, and whether Republicans weren't favoured and Democrats were favoured. But the long story cut short here is that Donald Trump just can't get to advance any argument, because in this latest federal appeal, as in other court hearings before it, the judges have gone to some lengths to say there is no merit here. You haven't laid out any specificity to back your claims of voting irregularity, or to use Donald Trump's word, fraud. So it's back to square one. The only remaining step really now is to try to kick it up to the Supreme Court of the United States. The key word there is to try. It's not a given that the Supreme Court would grant its attention to be given to these claims, but there have been some indications via Twitter from some of Donald Trump's legal team members that they do intend, they say, to take this to the Supreme Court next. So no luck so far, but yet they persist. There are important preconditions that Donald Trump put on that statement, which actually wasn't really a statement. It was more a response to a journalist's question. Interesting, because he hadn't taken any for 3 weeks since Election Day on the 3rd of November here. So the question was, if Joe Biden is granted the win by the Presidential Electoral College, would you leave the White House? And the answer was certainly, you know I will. But it's the precondition there. It's the Electoral College. Will it and when might it award the victory to Joe Biden? Well, pretty much all of that is going to be stacked up and voted on the 14th of December. So this leaves under 3 weeks for Donald Trump to try to somehow thwart or halt even the Electoral Commission process. Very, very difficult when you consider that he's had no luck so far. So it was a highly qualified statement. It appeared, yes, on face value to say there is a point at which I would be prepared to go and to go quietly, but, and then there are a whole lot of buts that he threw in there. The election's fraudulent. There's no way that Joe Biden got the 80 million votes that the tally says that he did in the popular vote. And it's almost as if, having said the earlier indication of a concession that there would be an acceptance that he'd have to leave the White House, it's almost as if Donald Trump had second thoughts on this, because he subsequently took to Twitter and wrote that Biden can only enter the White House as president if he can prove that his ridiculous 80 million votes were not fraudulently or illegally obtained. So it's almost like he's feeding back off that journalist question and the answer that he gave to try and revisit the argument and say, well, I might leave, but then I wouldn't unless we can get all this sorted in the courts. So a tough road to hoe for Donald Trump on almost any level.
The UK's R number for COVID-19, which measures the disease's ability to spread, has fallen below 1 for the first time since August. England is currently in lockdown, which is set to lift on December 2nd. On Friday in the UK, more than 500 deaths were reported within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test, and there were over 16,000 new cases, which is a 25% fall on the previous week.
Empty streets in Belfast today, with Northern Ireland beginning a 2-week circuit breaker lockdown to try to stem the spread of COVID-19. Non-essential shops are closed apart from click and collect services, and pubs, restaurants and cafes can only do takeaway and delivery.
We're asking people for 2 weeks to please abide by the public health advice so that we can then come together in and around that window at Christmas.
As Northern Ireland enters a new lockdown, England prepares to leave one next week, and already there's intense debate about the introduction of tiered restrictions. The government has set out how it decides which areas should go into which tiers. First of all, looking at case rates across all age groups, then rates amongst the over 60s. How rapidly are rates going up or coming down, and how many tests done come through positive? Finally, how much pressure is there on the NHS? But questions have been raised in some areas about the decisions. Newcastle's in Tier 3, for example. In Northumberland, local Conservative MPs had to respond to complaints from people about being lumped in with Newcastle. In Sussex, which is in Tier 2, officials say that with cases, the trend is increasing in several areas, and with local hospitals, things are fairly stable. In neighbouring Kent in Tier 3, they say there have been big case increases, and those in people aged over 60 are a particular concern, and hospital admissions are increasing. For Cumbria in Tier 2, cases in some areas are said to be increasing, but some of this is likely due to a large school outbreak. And in neighbouring Lancashire, which is in Tier 3, officials say case rates in over 60s are very high, and there is still pressure on the NHS.
At present, the levels of COVID within the community is still very high. and that will drive admissions coming into hospital. And if people are mixing in the community, that means that after Christmas, if people don't follow the rules, we'll see a further surge.
In Newcastle, a specialist intensive care unit has been created for COVID patients, though the latest R number for the northeast of England, showing how much the virus is spreading, is, like the northwest, below the overall UK figure. London and the southeast are higher.
Australia's trade start with China has escalated sharply, with new tariffs set to hit our wine industry hard. From today, all Australian wine will be slapped with a 100 to 200% hike, a move wine growers say will devastate their industry. China claims Australia is unfairly subsidising its winemakers, but the federal government says that Beijing's actions are a clear breach of an existing trade agreement.
The cumulative impact of China's trade sanctions against a number of Australian industries during the course of this year does give rise to the perception that these actions are being undertaken as a result or in response to some other factors.
Indigenous ranger groups in the Western Top End are working together to start a carbon abatement business by using early season burns to prevent wildfires. The project is expected to create jobs for remote communities and improve fire management in the Daly River Port Keats Aboriginal Lands Trust.
Fire can be an unforgiving element in the Western Top End. Indigenous rangers in the community of Wadare are honing their fire management skills to fight future wildfires.
The history of this part of the Western Top End is big fires just going right across the whole land trust every year, virtually every square inch getting burnt. And so it's not good for the plants, the animals, the carbon.
Preventing big fires through early burning also earns carbon credits that can be sold on the carbon market to offset emissions from others. That's why ranger groups in the Daly River Port Keats Aboriginal Land Trust are starting up a joint carbon abatement business.
Creating more jobs for other outstations, community, like more rangers and to work at country, you know, like get them at bush.
So them little kids now, like when they're finished from school, and we'll end up teaching them.
The last hurdle is the final approval.
We're taking you live now to Hamilton in Victoria, where the Education Minister Dan Tehan is speaking.
There is an alleged criminal network that has been seeking to defraud the Commonwealth Government. Can I say to the AFP, to Services Australia and the Federal Department of Education, congratulations on the work that you've done against this alleged criminal network. The government is absolutely determined to make sure that it continues to crack down on any fraud that is occurring against the Australian taxpayer. We have now seen savings of $3.1 billion made as a result of activity against fraud of the childcare system. We will continue to crack down on anyone who seeks to defraud the taxpayer. We've put an additional 380 integrity officials in place since 2018, and we will continue to do everything we can to protect the Australian taxpayer against fraud against the childcare system. I'm happy to take any questions.
Minister Christy Mayer from Channel 7 in Melbourne, was this mainly about the money, this particular task force, or were there ever any concerns about actual child welfare as part of this?
Well, this investigation was against fraud, but as you would know, for people who are pretending to run legitimate family daycare businesses and at the same time seeking to defraud the Commonwealth, then there would be concerns around the early childhood educators that are being used and the type of care that children are getting. So obviously the number one target was the defrauding of the Commonwealth, but there would always be concerns around what type of education and care is being provided to children while these alleged criminal networks are seeking to defraud the Commonwealth.
And you mentioned that you crack down. Sorry, keep going. Sorry, so you mentioned that this crackdown will continue. How widespread is this? Are there concerns that this is more widespread than what we know about now?
Well, we've already seen $3.1 billion saved as a result of the crackdown, and we will continue to explore and investigate anything that we see is suspicious with these criminal networks seeking to exploit the Australian taxpayer. Sadly, there will always be people who want to exploit the Australian taxpayer, so we will seek to always be investigating and making sure that we've got the resources to ensure this isn't occurring.
Minister Jade McMillan from ABC, could you provide any more information about how they allegedly defrauded the COVID-19 stimulus payments?
Look, that's obviously part of the investigation. There are allegations which have been made, there's arrests that's been made, and all that will be detailed as part of the criminal prosecution. So I don't want to go into any of that detail, but needless to say, there has been extensive work being done, cooperation between the AFP Services Australia and the Department of Education, both the Commonwealth Department of Education but also with assistance from the Department of Education in Victoria, and all the charges obviously will be laid out as part of the criminal prosecution.
We've been hearing there from Education Minister Dan Tehan there with details regarding the allegations that 5 people have been involved in defrauding the childcare system of millions of dollars and 10 properties being raided across New South Wales and Victoria. Now, let's check sport with Louise Ransom.